Great. I'll go live.
And I will pull up the PowerPoint. All right, Adam says he'll be on momentarily. Live streamed, okay. Last time I had issue with getting in presentation mode.
Be a button at the bottom.
It's not in present, right?
Yeah, I know it's not. Where do you do that? Is that it?
Do you see the where you can make it bigger or smaller at the very bottom? So just to that.
Slideshow.
Yeah.
Okay, what happens when I hit the down button? Okay, last time I had a lot of issues with the slides not advancing, but I think it's working.
Oh, here's Adam. Let's really quickly let him in. And
Hi, Adam. Hi, Adam.
here's Adam.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Right.
Okay, great. Sorry
Adam,
about that.
how do you pronounce your last name?
Beckley.
Beckley. Okay, thank you.
Yep.
Do you want to check your screen share real quick before we let everybody in?
Oopsies. I let everyone in.
Oh, all right, well, that works. All right. Now you stop and I'll start. Hi, everyone. Welcome to, what? Can everybody hear me?
Yep.
I want to say welcome to everyone for attending our March webinar. This is the third in our 2022 series from 1000 Friends of Wisconsin. Thank you for your patience as we were sorting out some last minute technical issues. I think after 2 years on Zoom, some of us are still getting all of this figured out. My name is Susan Geddert, pronouns she, her, hers, and I'm a special projects manager at 1000 Friends of Wisconsin. And I want to welcome everyone to today's webinar on Wisconsin's changing climate impacts and adaptation strategies. This is eligible for 1 CM credit for those of you that are interested in that. And we're going to be hearing from experts, Dr. Adam Beckley and Dr. Anna Haines, on a new report that was just released out of the Wisconsin Initiative on Climate Change Impacts. So we want to thank our sponsors, Madison Gas and Electric, Godfrey and Kahn, and as well as the Nelson Institute for Environmental Studies and the Wisconsin DNR for assisting today. Before we get to the presentation, I just want to offer a couple of updates and announcements from 1000 Friends. Our next webinar is April 20, Wednesday at noon. It's going to be a group presentation. We're going to present on reclaiming the streets for living together. You're going to hear from 5 of us, including me, also Dr. Joyce Tang Boyland from Alverno, Caressa Givens from the Wisconsin Bike Fed, Carrie McAndrews from UW-Madison Planning Department, and Amber Miller from AARP Wisconsin. So you'll hear a bunch of different perspectives on complete streets and how people form streets and streets impact people and all kinds of good stuff regarding that. The link to the register should be in the chat. Thanks to our Transportation Policy Director / Tech Guru, Greg May. And I just want to also add that the best way to stay up to date on any events that we are hosting or other upcoming news to sign up for our e-news. And there will be a link to that in the chat as well. So we have quite a few people on here. If you are not familiar with our organization, this is a quick and dirty intro. 1000 Friends of Wisconsin was founded in 1996. We're a land use planning nonprofit. We helped pass smart growth legislation back in the day. And ever since then, we have been promoting land use policies that advance healthy communities and equitable transportation and environmental preservation, and all of the things that go along with that. One of our programs, which is newer, is Active Wisconsin. That is the program I manage. And we have our own website, you can see on the screen there. But we are a coalition of communities and advocacy groups that are implementing active transportation, so walking, biking, transit access, and all of that infrastructure around the state. So we do a lot of resource sharing, we do a lot of advocacy at the state level, and if you're interested in joining us or hearing about what's going on, you can, again, visit the website and sign up for our e-news. And as you can see, we have social media handles there on the bottom of the screen. So a couple of quick updates from our organization. Just wanted to share, we're always up to a lot of different things, but most recently, Greg May, our Transportation Policy Director, assisted in drafting a letter that went to Governor Evers from our organization and 29 other organizations around the state, really emphasizing how important it is that the Department of Transportation prioritize infrastructure projects that promote equity and sustainability. So trying to move forward from the status quo of highway expansion and into territory that will be more responsive to climate change and equity needs within the state. And then something I did recently was I was a mentor with a program here in Dane County based out of the Monona Terrace Convention Center. It's called Terrace Town, and it is an opportunity for elementary school students to learn about sustainable city planning and green buildings from experts in the fields of architecture, planning, engineering, all that kind of stuff. So we met with elementary students to share our expertise, and they took that knowledge to design and build their own model cities in their schools. I was based at Crestwood Elementary on the west side of Madison. I worked with third graders there. Fabulous, fabulous teacher team at that school. And what you see here is a picture of the city center that they built. So normally Terrace Town is a public event at the exhibition hall, but because of COVID, everything had to move virtual, and students built their designs in their own schools and shared via Zoom. So that was an exciting way to share this knowledge and the importance of sustainability with the people who will be doing this in the future. So those are our updates from 1000 Friends. So today you are going to be hearing from these two individuals. They are from the Wisconsin Initiative on Climate Change Impacts, also known as WICCI, which is a large network of experts that just released a report very recently. You will hear more about that from them, but I want to introduce our speakers quickly. Dr. Anna Haines is a professor at UW-Stevens Point. She got her PhD in urban and regional planning from UW-Madison, and she's an expert in sustainable community development. And she also works as a specialist with UW Extension. We'll also hear from Dr. Adam Bechel, who is with Wisconsin Sea Grant. He has a PhD in civil and environmental engineering from UW-Madison and is an expert in coastal resilience and all the hazards related to climate change that have to do with the coast. And he advises communities on planning for that. So I'm going to stop screen sharing and hand this over to Anna first, who will introduce WICCI and the report and speak about her contributions to it. Oh, I forgot one thing. If anybody has questions, please put them in the chat. Greg and I will keep track, and we'll make sure there's time to have some of them answered at the end.
Okay. All right. Can you see my screen?
Yes, we're all good.
Okay. And you can hear me. Okay. Always good. All right. Well, thank you for having, oops, me. Where'd it go? All right, so a little bit more on me. I'm also the director of the Center for Land Use Education, so I just wanted to quickly introduce you to CLUE. We work with local governments of all sizes and help them make better decisions with regards to land use and development. We run a lot of workshops for plan commissions and boards of adjustments and appeals. Right now, as Susan indicated, I do a lot of work on climate change and with WICCI. So my path today is to give you an overview of WICCI, the new assessment report, some of the key climate change highlights, and then dig a bit into the community sustainability working group part of the report. And then I'll hand it over to Adam. All right, so what is WICCI? So it's really a collaboration of scientists and practitioners. It largely exists because we want it all to exist. It generates and shares information that can foster solutions to climate change in Wisconsin. Everyone who is part of WICCI believes in the mission and is working to achieve it. All right, so there are 14 working groups that are loosely organized under those categories at the top: air, water, land, people. The geospatial group is cross-cutting. And today we're going to focus on the people section in terms of community sustainability and water in terms of coastal resilience. So as I said, lots of people are involved in this. So over 200 scientists and practitioners. They represent lots and lots of agencies. And again, the working groups, and all of us have in one way or another been putting together the assessment report. So the assessment report, it just came out in February, actually published, and it's only electronic, and we consider it a dynamic report, so it can be updated. The last one was 10 years ago in 2011. What's different about this one in some respects is that it includes a lot of stories from around Wisconsin. It also includes a lot of strategies for both adapting to climate change and mitigating it by slowing and reducing greenhouse gas emissions. We've also tried to put a much greater emphasis on climate justice. So I'll get into some of the key climate highlights. We know Wisconsin's climate is changing. It's becoming both warmer and wetter, which in turn is affecting many industries and communities because of a shortened season of snow, the unpredictability of snow and cold. Summer is also getting much warmer with more and more days over 90 degrees. Both plants and animals, for example, suffer when it's both hot and humid outside. Dairy cows, for example, suffer heat stress when it gets over about 80 degrees and it's humid, which means they produce less milk. So there's an impact on dairy farmers and those animals, for example. In terms of wetter, we also know it's definitely been the wettest decade. In the 2010s, there were 21 events that affected most parts of Wisconsin, and this map shows some of those events and the number of inches that we saw. So you can see kind of the pattern of where we saw much wetter weather, which was to that western and southern edges of Wisconsin. So communities across Wisconsin are recognizing that without a large reduction in greenhouse gas emissions, we will see even bigger impacts to people, businesses, industry, tourism, and natural resources in Wisconsin. Wisconsin's communities, businesses, households will need to respond to climate change, and a lot of them are already doing it. And it requires lots of new approaches. So in terms of mitigation, we see the transition to renewables happening, especially right now with large-scale solar farms getting both built and proposed. And of course, they're bringing their own controversies with them. I think all utilities at this point in Wisconsin are reducing greenhouse gas emissions and have promised to turn off their coal-fired power plants in the next 5 to 20 years. So the transition to renewables at a utility scale is happening reasonably quickly. Another approach is adaptation to both warmer and wetter weather. So many communities are beginning to turn to more nature-based solutions, for example, to deal with increased stormwater runoff and to prevent flooding. I'll talk a little bit more about both of those in a moment. So I am going now to turn to the community sustainability part of the report. It's going to be a quick flyover. Just like all the chapters, there is an abundance of information, so I can't cover it here. I encourage you to pick up the report and find where you see yourself in making a difference. There's an awful lot of work to get done. Lots of advocacy needed, both at a community level and beyond. We can all contribute in some way, shape, or form. So the goal of the WICCI Community Sustainability Working Group is to support communities in the process of finding solutions to climate change. That means we work to find experts, information, and technologies that are going to save local governments time and money to make their communities more resilient. Often those local governments are the ones dealing with the immediate impacts of wetter weather, for example, a big flooding event. They are also those on point for helping their community recover and shape how they position themselves for moving forward and minimizing future impacts. So becoming resilient to our warmer and wetter weather. So I did want to make sure that you knew who was involved in this working group. Lots of who you see on the screen were not involved in the first Wiki report, but myself and Laurel Sukup from DNR Sustainability and Business Support Group help to identify and convince a whole set of people to become part of this working group. So they represent planners, economic development, practitioners, elected officials, local utility experts, as well as several associations that represent towns, cities, villages, such as the League. We also have the Oneida Nation represented, the PSC, DOA, WEDC, and a legal firm that works with local governments as well. All right, so I mentioned that the Community Sustainability Working Group is focused on supporting communities in finding solutions to climate change so that they can be more resilient and sustainable. I know that we often talk about sustainability as a three-legged stool, or maybe even intersecting circles. However, I'd like us all to think about this representation that I have on the screen. Sometimes it's called the nested egg model. It helps people visualize that the economy is a subset or wholly dependent on society. Society makes the rules in order for the economy to function, and that our society is completely dependent on the environment or our natural resource base, air, water, etc. So this kind of diagram can be effective as a communication tool as we connect with local governments and others to put into perspective that not only will climate change unbalance our lives, it can cause far more catastrophic consequences. So I'm going to recall this in a few slides. All right, the report itself does a solid job of clearly documenting what local governments are experiencing and what is keeping them up at night. We not only go into the abundant information around ever increasingly strong weather patterns, but how that is manifesting on the landscape. I'm sure this picture of the storm reports and the one where the flood has, destroyed the roadway is familiar to many of you. To me, it represents the kind of the poster for some of those 2016 floods and then 2018 floods that happened in the northern part of the state. Again, another example of how we are impacted from heavy rainfall, which can cost lives and lots of costly physical damage. So this one happened in Dane County. I'm sure many of you remember that one as well. In the report, we acknowledge that climate change impacts everyone. And that is not the whole story. We want to amplify the message that not everyone is impacted equally. And as we consider future actions, we need to support communities of color, First Nations, and those that live in poverty. Often they are the ones that are affected most. Another finding is that special attention must be paid to the health impacts of climate change within our communities. There are emergency responses that need to happen with flooding, fires, or other extreme weather events. But then there are the pressures that arise and inflict chronic health issues like diseases from insects, etc., or even backed up sewage. So we can become more resilient to those things. We cannot dismiss the impact of high heat on the wellness. So days over 90 degrees, for example, and how so many of these situations are worse in communities that do not have the coping mechanisms or resources like air conditioning, air filtering, or other solutions. So what are communities concerned about? The infrastructure working group, so yet another one, asked managers, elected officials, planners, consultants, and others who work with local governments to participate in a survey in 2020. The chart that you see shows the respondents' concerns. The answers that receive the most concern are related to climate change. And of course, you can tell when the survey was conducted because the pandemic also shows up as a primary concern. So at the top is impacts of increasing seasonal extreme storm precipitation, for example. So another way to look at the survey responses that they received was who answered and how they answered. So planners and the other category tend to have more concern, if you look at the horizontal red rectangle, over climate-related issues than other respondents. And in that is climate change impacts on disadvantaged populations, high Great Lakes water levels, for example, which Adam will get more into. So impacts from seasonal and extreme storms as well is in that. All right, as I said, I am part of Extension, and several years ago, a team I was on, we call it our climate leadership team, put together a survey that we sent to local governments. One of those questions focused on the challenges that local governments face in striving to create quality, livable places that are resilient and sustainable. And 3 key challenges among them were identified. So funding, the ability to fund projects, staffing, so the ability to hire more staff and identify and hire the right staff as we move into perhaps a new and different realm that we haven't been in before. Finally, finding the right expertise. So the people to help a local government move beyond the silos, move beyond business as usual, and helping to address the funding and staffing challenges. So the big question for me, and I think for others, is how can we work to assist local governments in making more resilient communities? So what do? I'm a planner, so of course we have to plan. Planning is critical to moving forward though, and everyone needs to be included in a planning process, bringing their ideas and creative solutions into the dialogue. This can often include local government staff, and I do think it should. They're the ones that often have to do the heavy lifting. And they need to be on board with what a plan actually says. So I'll give you a quick little example. I serve on our Water and Sewer Commission in the city of Stevens Point, and the staff there are really innovative and creative in solving various issues. It includes reducing greenhouse gas emissions. So many years ago, the sewer treatment plant started to create its own heat and energy through burning methane, and the idea came from staff and was supported by others. It's just one little simple thing that they were able to implement. We also need to dig in on understanding the unique situations across the state, and this is often best done on the local and county level, as each community has their specific set of circumstances. We know how different northern Wisconsin communities can be from southern ones. And so establishing and setting meaningful goals and objectives are important so we can move the needle forward, and we need to get going. So one way and one example of getting going is from Eau Claire. They have been working for several years on creating new elements to their comprehensive plan, whether it's focused on sustainability, their downtown, their waterways, and most recently, they have a new plan that is focused on renewable energy and how to move forward with that. As indicated from Eau Claire, part of getting on with it includes alternative energy. Wisconsin, as I had said before, is seeing many large solar farm proposals and quite a few in the construction phase. Smaller solar farms are also getting proposed and constructed. Some communities have small community solar arrays, so that 10 to 50 megawatts, for example. In addition, many communities are also looking into microgrids. So for a neighborhood, for example, to ensure more reliable energy in terms of severe storms. Another example of moving ahead is seeing what the Milwaukee Metropolitan Sewerage District is doing. They have taken an innovative approach to managing water within their region of Southwest Wisconsin, taking a more ecological approach rather than a purely engineering approach to water management. For many years, green infrastructure has been a method that combines an ecological approach with an engineering approach and aims to manage as much water on site as possible. So the photos show some examples where MMSD is working with local governments and households on managing their water. Another program they have started is called Green Seams and is focused on land protection in its natural state. So part of what to do as a community plans is to create an inventory of place, and in particular, understanding vulnerabilities to climate change. This means not only understanding who is vulnerable, but where is vulnerable. So those two factors together can help to focus where and what kinds of resources need to be brought to bear. And this resource from DHS starts to provide some indication of where counties are with a number of different factors. One final resource I wanted to let you know about is Extension's Community Climate Resilience Menu. It was published late in 2021, and it is a curated set of resources addressing agriculture and food systems, the built and natural environment, and energy efficiency and renewables. My colleagues and I see this as a dynamic and ever-changing menu. It's organized in a menu format and includes equity and environmental justice, education and information, low-cost strategies, significant resource deployment, and grants and funding for each of the main themes. All right, I'm about at the end here. Whatever you do and wherever you work, I hope you can begin to use WICCI's new assessment report or other reports from the various working groups. If you dig down into the working group websites, there's all sorts of more technical reports in there. And so with that, I will stop my presentation and hand it over to Adam.
Thanks, Anna. Thanks for giving the introduction of WICCI as well as summarizing what the community sustainability work group is up to. My name's Adam Bechel. I'm with Wisconsin Sea Grant, and I'm a co-chair of the Great Lakes Coastal Resilience Working Group. And so before I get going, I'd like to acknowledge sort of all the members of this Coastal Resilience Working Group, my fellow co-chair David Hart with Wisconsin Sea Grant, as well as a number of work group members who've contributed to our efforts over the years, from DNR, Wisconsin Coastal Management Program, the UW-Madison College of Engineering and Geosciences, Ozaukee County Association of State Floodplain Managers, and USGS. I'd also like to point out that this Coastal Resilience Working Group focuses on sort of the built environment of coastal communities. There's also a Great Lakes work group that focuses more on the in-lake ecology and the climate change impacts on that part of the Great Lakes. So a lot of folks may not think of Wisconsin as a coastal state, but Wisconsin has around 1,000 miles of coastline between Lake Superior and Lake Michigan. And so to put that on par with sort of the rest of the country, this graphic from NOAA kind of illustrates where we stack up with our ocean counterparts. And you'll see the entire continental Pacific coastline is about 1,300 miles. So Wisconsin matches up pretty well with that entire Pacific seaboard. And so we really are a coastal state. And what does that mean for our state? Well, our Great Lakes coast provide a place for us to live. There's about 2.1 million residents in the coastal area. That's about 37% of Wisconsin's population. It's a place where we recreate and we sort of find a sense of place and culture. There's, for example, over 200 coastal access points at beaches and numerous other coastal access points to enjoy the Great Lakes, no matter if you own property or just are a visitor. And also the Great Lakes are an economic driver. A lot of industry relies on the Great Lakes. For example, our Great Lakes coastal ports generate about $1.5 billion of revenue every year. And there's a lot of industries that then rely on our Great Lakes ports. But the Great Lakes can also be a place where we experience a lot of unique hazards in the state. Coastal flooding, coastal erosion, and then in some instances, when we don't have enough water to conduct our shipping or recreational boating and things like that. And so I first want to kind of start off talking about some of the main climate stressors on our Great Lakes coastal communities. And as Anna mentioned, one of the themes of the overall Wiki report is Wisconsin is going to be facing a warmer and wetter climate. But what does that mean for our Great Lakes coast? So one main stressor to the Great Lakes is wave energy. These are large lakes, and storms create pretty big erosive waves that can be damaging to our coastlines and cause flooding. On the flip side, we're coming out of our season of or at least typical season of ice cover, where in many years we do get ice forming on these lakes. With regards to coastal communities, that ice can provide a buffer to the shoreline from those erosive waves, as well as give less open water for those waves to develop. So that can kind of act in the opposite direction in terms of protecting our coastal communities. For shippers, however, ice on the lakes means that shipping is shut down for a few months each year, and it's just starting to open up again right about now. And then one of the big factors on the Great Lakes is the water levels. Lake Superior has a historic range of around 4 feet from its record high to record low. Lake Michigan, that range is over 6 feet from record high to record low. And so what happens at the end of these extremes? Well, we're just sort of in and coming out of record high water levels. And so when those water levels are high, that brings the erosive waves up to things we care about, brings it up to our infrastructure, brings it up to in our sort of coastal bluff areas, brings those waves up and able to eat away and erode at those coastal bluffs and start to impact things that we care about, our homes, infrastructure at the top. In our more lower lying areas, high water levels makes it that much more readily that these areas will be subject to flooding. When we think about our sort of marine economy, at high water levels, shippers are typically pretty happy because that gives them extra draft in the ports. Their boats can carry more cargo and sort of ride a little bit lower on the water without fear of grounding on the bottom. On the flip side, when we have extreme low water levels, that's really a big stress to our marine economy. Ships have to carry less cargo so that they can ride a little higher in the water. Dredging becomes a concern in our harbors, with some of our recreational harbors having real tough time staying open when water levels are real low due to the dredging demands. But then on the flip side, low water levels expose wider beaches, and it keeps those waves away from eroding our bluffs and beaches. So there's kind of a lot of different ways the Great Lakes can impact our coastal communities. And so climate is going to change these variables a bit. And so I'll start first with what will happen with the Great Lakes water levels, because that's sort of a really big determinant of what's going on our coast. And so up on the screen here is 100+ years of water levels in Lake Superior on the top and Lake Michigan on the bottom. Lake Michigan and Lake Huron are hydrologically connected at the Straits of Mackinac, so that's why it's listed as Lake Michigan Huron. The water level is essentially the same between those two lakes. And I'd bring your attention to what I've shaded in red, which was a decade plus of prolonged low water levels that started in the late 1990s and kept on going till about 2013, culminating, at least in Lake Michigan, with an all-time record low right here. And so, like I said, that put a lot of stress on our shipping industry and our recreational marinas. But then since reaching that record low, we had the wettest period in recorded history in the Great Lakes Basin. And that was a big reason why water levels shot up to record high levels in the year 2020. So this sort of real rapid change from record low to record high had never really been witnessed before in history. So this is sort of maybe a precursor of what we might be dealing with into our projected lake levels. And so when we think about where lake levels are going, we have to think about water, how it gets into our lakes and out of our lakes. And one main input of water to the lakes is precipitation directly on the lake, as well as runoff from the land surface around the lakes. But water also leaves the lake in pretty substantial quantities through evaporation from the lake surface. We also have flow in and out through connecting channels. So for Lake Michigan Huron, we have flow in from Lake Superior through the St. Mary's River and flow out through the St. Clair River out to Lake Erie. And we also have diversions into and out of the lake system. And again, for Lake Michigan, we have the Chicago River that diverts water out into the Mississippi Basin. But really, when we're thinking about sort of environmental controls on our Great Lakes water levels, it's these first three: precipitation, runoff, and evaporation that primarily control these large swings in water levels. And so folks who sort of work on water levels can think about this in terms of net basin supply. So the supply of water into the lakes, that's our precipitation plus our runoff minus the water leaving from evaporation. And so now thinking about where we're going into the future, again, the underlying theme with the Wiki report, warmer and wetter. So wetter climate is going to increase the precipitation runoff going into the lake, but our warmer climate is likely to facilitate more evaporation out of the lake. So we're going to have greater increases in the water coming in and coming out, which sort of gives, at this point, an uncertain answer about what's going to happen to our Great Lakes water levels. Because we have an intensification of sort of the inputs and the outputs. I guess sort of the latest understanding is we may see slightly higher water levels, we may see slightly lower water levels, but we need to prepare to continue to see those extremes on both ends of the spectrum and possibly continue to see what we've just seen, which is rapid changes between those two, possibly beyond the historic ranges. Thinking about other variables like wave energy, this image up here is from a recent study out of Michigan Tech University, looking at any trends in wave energy that have been seen on Lake Michigan in the last 40 years. And so on the left is the mean wave energy. The middle is the highest 10% of waves, and the right-hand side is the highest 1% of waves. So those are the big damaging storm waves. And those colors, red is where they've observed a decreasing trend in wave energy, and blue is where there's been an increasing trend in wave energy. And sort of the takeaway from this plot is there's not a real consistent trend that has been observed over the last 40 years. We've seen increases and decreases in wave energy, but no trend upward and downward across the lakes. But that may be changing in the future, and a big variable of that is our ice cover on the Great Lakes. So in a warming climate, we have been seeing and expect to continue to see decreasing ice cover on the Great Lakes. So this is a plot of ice cover across all the Great Lakes over the period of record. And so you can see that we've seen decreasing ice cover throughout that period of record, and in a warming climate, expect that to continue. So what does that mean for a Great Lakes coastal climate change impact? So water levels, we continue to see highs and lows, possibly more rapid changes, possibly higher highs and lower lows. Expecting to see a decrease in ice cover. And then this is where we come into wave energy. If we have less ice cover on the lakes, that allows more wave energy to reach our coasts and allows bigger areas for that wave energy to act, especially in our winter season when we get our largest storms. So these pressures, when it comes to coastal communities, we're likely to see increases in the hazards that we're concerned with, increases in coastal flooding, infrastructure damage, and coastal erosion from that increased wave energy. And then in terms of shipping, with increased extremes in water levels, we may see periods where we have good water depths for ships, and also periods where we're stressed out about low water levels. But a decline in ice cover is likely to expand that shipping season. So there's trade-offs to the shippers in these expected impacts. But one maybe preview of these impacts on the coast is what happened on January 10th and 11th, 2020, the southeastern Wisconsin coastal storm. And so to set the stage for what happened, this was the highest water level on Lake Michigan in recorded history for a January event. And also this lower pot on the lower left shows what the ice cover was for that day. So blue is no ice cover, and anything other than blue is ice cover. This was an extremely low time for ice cover on the lake. So this high water levels, no ice cover, really set the stage for when a large coastal storm came in, pretty significant damage, a lot of it which was centered in southeastern Wisconsin, and resulted in a $30 million presidential disaster declaration. The bottom photo, you can see about a 30-foot sewer pipe just tossed on the beach in Racine. And a lot of communities are still sort of recovering from this event. So that's sort of one example of what things we may see more frequently with these climate variables changing. So what can we do to adapt to these changes? Our Wiki report has a number of strategies. I'll just cover a couple here, but one is with those continued extremes expected in lake levels is to consider function at all lake levels. So when lake levels are high, not making drastic changes that may not work when lake levels are low, and vice versa. Coordinating actions along the coast. The coast is an interconnected area. Actions that are taken in one place can have impacts elsewhere because wave energy can be impacted by actions on the coast. So one thing that's going on is sort of regional collaboration groups that have been forming on Lake Superior, Lake Michigan, and in the East River watershed in the Green Bay area, bringing folks together, talking about these issues and sharing approaches is really something we're trying to move forward with to get people more prepared to take adaptive actions. On a more property level, locating homes away from eroding shorelines. So this was a house in Sheboygan County that got picked up and moved back away from the eroding coast. It was much cheaper than trying to fight the erosion. From a planning or municipal level, this can be done for new development by creating ordinances which factor in erosion, to factor in bluff failure, as well as uncertainty and having some sort of buffer setback distance where new development, how close it can be to our eroding shorelines. And then one final piece is working with natural processes to protect the coast. An example of this comes from Maryville, Michigan, where they replaced a steel sheet pile wall with a vegetated sill. So there's rock here to take some wave energy. There's vegetation that can take a little bit more wave energy, and then another layer of rock. This provides much more habitat and an adaptive shoreline for our water level changes. Here you can see it at high water levels. You can learn more about these adaptation strategies. We have a series of guides called Adapting to a Changing Coast for property owners and for local government officials. We have basically two-page spreads for a number of adaptation options. For example, adopting a long lot format for new subdivision that would facilitate being able to move homes back from the shoreline. And like I said, you can find a lot more information, as Anna said, at our Wiki website. This is the Coastal Resilience Working Group website. And with that, I'd like to thank you for your attention. I think we'll probably move on to questions.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, both of you, Dr. Haines and Dr. Bechel. There was so much good information in there. I was taking notes. We do have some questions in the chat, so I will just go kind of in the order that they were coming in. We had a question about how do mitigation efforts fit into the report, not just adaptation. I know Anna touched on that some, but if there is anything more either of you have to share, that was the first thing that came up.
Yeah, I mentioned it, and yes, I think mitigation is now included if it's appropriate to the working group. You know, for 8 years, a lot of the people who are working in Wiki couldn't talk about climate change or mitigation, particularly mitigation. So the focus was on adaptation. I think the new report and we're moving towards, yeah, talking about mitigation more. And I know our community sustainability working group definitely talks about mitigation and how it affects, you know, agriculture, etc. I think agriculture is also talking about mitigation, methane reduction, from dairy farms, etc. So yes, there is more conversation about mitigation.
That is good to hear for sure. Thank you. Couple of questions specifically, sounds like they're directed to Adam. So one, somebody asked, can wave energy be tapped as an energy resource? That's something we've looked into.
So it can be, it's sort of an emerging area. I'm not sure if it's really been explored that greatly in the Great Lakes, because I think it's more of a resource on our ocean coastlines where we have more consistent swell coming in. The Great Lakes wave energy is more due to storms. So, but yes, possibly we'll see it in the Great Lakes in the future.
Sounds like an interesting engineering question for sure. All right, I'm just going to keep going in order that these are coming in. So there was a question about a Senate bill and an Assembly bill that would affect the state constitution. I am not familiar with those, but they were Senate Bill 900 and Assembly Bill 849. That was a question from Fred. Fred, if you could unmute yourself and elaborate. Are you able to do that?
I know. Well, I will say, so WICCI is not an advocacy organization. So I don't know about those two bills. It sounds like just from a personal basis, I should look them up. But WICCI as a whole won't be advocating one way or the other. But it sounds like we should understand, if they pass, how it may impact climate change, talking about it, and what maybe local governments can do.
Thank you. So just so everybody knows, this is being recorded, and the recording will go up on YouTube, and then we'll make sure it gets included in newsletters and things. So I will include all the links that were discussed in the notes for that, and I will also look up these bills and try to find some information to follow up on that, just in case anybody in the audience is interested in knowing more, because now I'm curious.
Yeah.
Let's see. Looks like another question for Adam here. Oh, I have to scroll up. It has to do with, here we go. Can units of government in Wisconsin require setbacks along eroding shorelines? Seems like there was some controversy around that at some point.
Yeah, so I believe in 2016 there was the actual law escapes me, but there was a law restricting development setbacks on lakes based on that couldn't be more restrictive than the state minimum standard, which was 75 feet from the ordinary high water mark, which is sort of determined to be like where the presence of the lake has made its presence known. So sort of usually the erosion line of where vegetation stops existing. So that did impact quite a few of the ordinances on the books in a number of counties. So basically setback ordinances are done county by county in Wisconsin, but sort of recognizing the Great Lakes are a bit different. A lot of those ordinances have been adapted to not reference the ordinary high water mark anymore, but to reference an erosional feature, say the edge of an eroding bluff. And so that is one way those ordinances have been adapted, and actually probably making them referencing maybe a more appropriate feature for erosion setbacks. So, but yes, there was a lot of work that had to be done to follow the new law.
Great. All right, Adam, another question for you. What about, so we heard a lot about coastlines along the Great Lakes. Have you done work, or is there anything in this report about smaller lakes, like the lakes in Madison or river shorelines, that kind of thing?
Yeah, so there is a water resources wiki working group that focused a lot on our inland lakes and inland bodies of water. And so those are going to respond a little bit differently than our Great Lakes, but a lot of the a lot of the information, a lot of the ideas are similar. So I would encourage you to check out the Water Resources Working Group.
Great. Next question. It's really hard to scroll in the chat, sorry. Somebody said, while offshore wind power has been advocated for along the ocean coast, we have not heard about turbines sitting in the Great Lakes. Is there a reason for that?
So yeah, there has yet to be an offshore wind development in the Great Lakes. The one that's sort of closest along is in Cleveland. I think it's called Project Icebreaker. I know there was sort of assessment of the wind resources, and there are some good ones in the Great Lakes. You'd have to go pretty deep and put in deep foundations to get to where the wind is the best. And I know there's an advancement in sort of floating foundation wind turbines that may be changing the calculus there. But so far, sort of waiting for that. Everyone's maybe waiting for that first project to go in and see how that goes. So
Right. Well, I also think just like the Atlantic coast, when they're talking about the wind farm off the coast, it's really controversial. Landowners along the coastline do not want to see that in their sight lines. So there's a lot of pushback on putting wind turbines in the lake.
yeah, and I know that is one of the issues with the Cleveland project.
Yeah.
Coastal landowners, raising lawsuits about that.
Yeah.
And I think one thing I've heard with these floating foundations is you can then locate the turbines further offshore, so the visual obstruction would be less, but also impacts on bird migration and bat migration across the lakes. So I know that's something they also had to contend with, was trying to find a location that did not interfere with those important corridors. And Mike Freeze is mentioning the Public Service Commission did have a wind on the water report, I think about 10 years ago, looking at that in the Great Lakes. So thanks, Mike.
Great, thank you. I wanted to shift away from the coast for a second and just ask, this is a question that Greg and I were discussing earlier, and this may be more, well, this is for both of you, but maybe more for Anna. How can people take information from this report and get it into their community plans? I mean, Anna, I think you touched on that some, but it's kind of a practical question, but also I think related to working along multiple levels of systems that, and all the bureaucracy. How do we actually get this in there and convince the policymakers that this is what we need to do?
I know that's always hard, right? We all know that. One is, I think lots of comprehensive plans are due for updates. And so I think contacting your mayor, village board, your alders, etc., and asking them when they're going to do an update and that you'd like to see resilience and mitigation integrated into the plan, or have a special chapter that's focused on climate change and resilience. I think those are two things. And also advocating that you want to see like a citizens advisory board to develop the plan. So I think all of those just to start, and then I think going through other places and their plans and seeing what they're talking about and doing, and advocating for those in your own community. There are so many, I just can't name one, but I think in terms of action, it's getting your planning staff, if you have any, and then the alders and others to support a planning process that's going to address the issues.
Thank you. I just realized it's 12:59, so I'm afraid I have to cut off our Q&A here, but thank you so much. This was really fabulous. I encourage everyone to go check out the report. please sign up for our next webinar. I'm going to share my screen so you can see my slides. But please check out our next webinar, April 20. That's going to be a group presentation again by myself and 4 other people, where you'll hear all about complete streets and kind of a lot of these themes, but on a very much more localized level. And then once again, if you want to contact any of us at 1000 Friends, our information is here. Our social media handles are here. Sign up for our newsletter. We do not bombard you with emails. You get one really informative newsletter per month from 1000 Friends or Active Wisconsin, and brief updates if there's something really important coming up, like a webinar. And that is all you'll hear from us. So thanks again, everyone, for joining us. It was really fantastic to hear from these experts. Thank you again, Adam and Anna. Thank you, Greg, for being the tech support and chat manager. And we will see you all next time.
Thank you.
Thank you.